Good evening, I'm Amna Nawaz.
And I'm Jeff Bennett. On the NewsHour tonight, the U.S. Supreme Court mistakenly posts a draft opinion, signaling it may soon rule emergency abortions in Idaho are legal for now.
As the trial of Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich begins, we take a look at what his detention says about Russia today.
And Judy Woodruff reports on the growing political divide within some Christian communities as religious affiliation declines.
If you look at data and trust in institutions, we don't trust anything today as much as we trusted it 40 years ago, whether it be banks or unions or the media or religion.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by
Consumer Cellular. This is Sam. How may I help you? This is a pocket dial. Well, somebody's pocket.
Thought I'd let you know that with Consumer Cellular,
You get nationwide coverage with no contract. That's kind of our thing.
have a nice day.
A successful business owner sells his company and restores his father's historic jazz club with his son. A Raymond James financial advisor gets to know you, your passions, and the way you bring people together. Life well planned.
the Judy and Peter Bloom Kovler Foundation, upholding freedom by strengthening democracies at home and abroad. The Walton Family Foundation, working for solutions to protect water during climate change so people and nature can thrive together. Supported by the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, committed to building a more just, verdant, and peaceful world. More information at macfound.org. And with the ongoing support of these institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
Welcome to the NewsHour. The U.S. Supreme Court handed down two opinions today, but has left some of the most politically fraught cases for the final few days of its term. One of those left undecided for now is focused on abortion and the future of a strict ban in Idaho.
We may have clues about how the justices will decide the case after a document was mistakenly posted to the court website before being removed. The copy of the yet-to-be-finalized opinion suggests a 6-3 decision that would allow hospitals in the state to perform abortions to protect the life of the patient. But it also leaves the heart of the case unresolved, as the court appears poised to say the plaintiffs lack standing. John Yang is here now to explain how the mistake happened and what it could mean for the court. So, John, let's start with that. A document is posted briefly on the website and then removed. What do we know about what happened?
Well, unlike the case that overturned Roe versus Wade 2 years ago, this does not appear to be a leak. It appears to be a case of what they call fat thumbs. Patricia McCabe, the court spokesperson, issued a statement saying the court's publications unit inadvertently and briefly uploaded a document to the court's website. The court's opinion in these cases will be issued in due course.
And it got a lot of attention, of course, because it is about an abortion case in Idaho, a law banning essentially almost all abortions, imposing a penalty of up to 5 years in prison for doctors who perform them. What did the document say about the case?
Well, first of all, the caveat, we don't know if this is a final draft. We don't know how many reiterations there may be before it's formally released. But what Bloomberg posted says that the court is saying essentially this case is not ready for us. So we're sending it back. We're going to reinstate the district court's injunction blocking temporarily the Idaho law pending appeal, and we're sending it back to that court for a trial where they can hear evidence on both sides. It was a 6-3 decision. The three most conservative justices, Clarence Thomas, Samuel Alito, and Neil Gorsuch, all dissented. And one of the liberal justices, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson, had a little bit of a dissent. She said she thought the court ought to go ahead and decide this now. She wrote, "While this court dawdles and the country waits, pregnant people experiencing medical conditions remain in precarious position as their doctors are kept in the dark about what the law requires." We should note this is the second time this month that the Supreme Court has sidestepped an abortion case. 2 weeks ago, they avoided a definitive decision on the availability of mifepristone by saying that the plaintiffs in those cases did not have standing.
So we should underscore here, the ruling has not been issued here, but does the document tell us how the case could be decided?
It's hard to tell. The three liberal justices all sided with the government, the Biden administration, and said that the Idaho law should be overturned. The three dissenters, the most conservative of the three justices, said the Idaho law is just fine. It ought to be allowed to stay. We don't know about the other three justices, the Chief Justice John Roberts, Brett Kavanaugh, and Amy Coney Barrett. Their positions aren't clear. So they're the ones to watch when this case comes back to the Supreme Court, as it almost surely will.
You will be watching and we will be following. Thank you for adding clarity to a rather confusing day on the Supreme Court. John Yang, good to see you.
Thanks.
We start the day's other headlines with an unfolding situation in Bolivia, where the president says the country is facing an attempted coup. Armored vehicles have rammed the doors of the government palace in the city of La Paz. Tanks could be seen entering the city's main square, and armed military police with riot shields marched the streets. President Luis Arce took to social media, posting a video of himself flanked by his ministers to call for, in his words, democracy to be respected. Bolivia has seen increasing protests in recent months over the nation's recent economic decline. Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant said today there's been significant progress in addressing the issue of U.S. weapons supplies to Israel. His comments came as he wrapped up a visit to Washington. Last week, Israel's prime minister frustrated allies after saying the Biden administration had been withholding arms shipments for months. U.S. officials said they'd only held back one shipment. Netanyahu also said he was committed to a U.S.-backed ceasefire deal after giving mixed messages about his stance. And today, Gallant affirmed that Israel fully supports it.
We stand firmly behind the president's deal, which Israel has accepted, and now Hamas must accept or bear the consequences. We are committed to bringing the hostages home, with no exception.
On the ground in northern Gaza, ambulances arrived today at the site of an Israeli airstrike on the Jabalia refugee camp. A hospital official says at least 13 people were killed in the attack. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange is back in his home country of Australia. He arrived hours after pleading guilty to obtaining and publishing U.S. military secrets. Assange embraced his wife Stella, who had long fought for his release. His return closes out a 14-year legal battle, which included 5 years in a British prison. The White House said today it was not involved in the deal that led to his release. Today, the U.S. Supreme Court sided with the Biden administration over its ability to communicate with social media platforms. In a 6-3 ruling, the justices rejected a challenge from 2 Republican states that would have prevented officials from contacting companies to remove posts seen to contain misinformation. The White House welcomed the ruling, saying it helps the Biden administration continue our important work with technology companies to protect the safety and security of the American people. Devastation across the Midwest and Central Plains has come into clearer focus tonight as floodwaters start to recede. The flood left behind collapsed streets and houses washed clear off their foundations. A house that we showed you yesterday, teetering on the edge of an eroding riverbank in Minnesota, fell into the rushing river overnight. The family had been evacuated beforehand. Parts of Nebraska, Iowa, South Dakota, and Minnesota have been swamped by torrential rain. Up to 18 inches of rain fell in some areas. Hundreds of people were rescued, and at least 2 people died after driving in flooded areas. Kenya's president said today he will not sign a controversial finance bill after protesters stormed the country's parliament yesterday. A human rights group says at least 22 people were killed in the violence. Today, soldiers and police patrolled the streets of Nairobi as workers cleaned up debris left behind. The unrest started as lawmakers passed a bill that would have raised taxes to pay off the country's debt. Critics argued it would have added further pain to Kenyans already living in poverty. In a televised address, President William Ruto acknowledged that the bill caused, quote, widespread dissatisfaction, and he called for national unity.
And I am therefore proposing that because we have gotten rid of the Finance Bill 2024, it is necessary for us to have a conversation as a nation going forward.
The White House has condemned the violence and urged the Kenyan government today to, quote, respect the rights of all its citizens. The Episcopal Church elected Sean Rowe as its new spiritual and executive leader today. The 49-year-old currently serves as Bishop of the Diocese of Northwestern Pennsylvania. He'll replace presiding Bishop Michael Curry, who was the first black leader in the church's 239-year history. Curry was an outspoken advocate of racial justice and LGBTQ+ equality. He rose to global prominence in 2018 when he delivered a rousing sermon at the widely televised marriage of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. And Wall Street posted minimal gains today, even as Amazon's market value topped $2 trillion for the first time. The Dow Jones Industrial Average barely budged, adding just 15 points. The Nasdaq performed a little better, adding 87 points. The S&P 500 added modestly higher. Still to come on the NewsHour, President Biden pardons thousands of veterans previously convicted under the U.S. military's former ban on gay sex. A look at how immigration is shaping up to be a key issue in November's election, and a new trial finds a twice-yearly injection gives total protection from HIV infection.
This is the PBS NewsHour from WETA Studios in Washington and in the West from the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism at Arizona State University.
For the first time since the Cold War, a journalist has gone on trial in Russia for espionage. The Wall Street Journal's Evan Gershkovich appeared in court today, accused of working on behalf of the CIA. Nick Schifrin is here now with that story. Nick?
Amna, the White House calls the trial a, quote, sham, and the charges against Gershkovich fiction. The U.S. classifies him as wrongfully detained, but he will now be tried on charges with a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. In a Russian court 900 miles from Moscow, padlocked into a glass box, Evan Gershkovich managed today to flash a smile. And yet the 32-year-old American journalist is a prisoner of Putin's penal system, where conviction rates are 99%. Today's hearing lasted 2 hours and brought Gershkovich back to Yekaterinburg, where last March police arrested him on a reporting trip. He is the first American reporter accused of espionage in nearly 30 years.
The investigation has established and documented that the American journalist, on orders of the CIA, collected secret information about the activities of a defense enterprise.
The U.S. and Wall Street Journal deny that, and today the Journal called the trial, quote, shameful and illegitimate. Evan is a journalist who is accredited by the Russian government, and journalism is not a crime. But the U.S. believes Gershkovich's trial and anticipated conviction could help facilitate a prisoner swap, a possibility that Putin confirmed earlier this month to international journalists.
Such issues are not decided via mass media. They prefer a discreet, calm, and professional approach and dialogue between special services. And they certainly should be decided only on the basis of reciprocity.
Americans believe that means 2 for 2 or 1 for 1, as it went in 2022. WNBA star Brittany Griner in exchange for a notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout. Several Americans remain in Russian custody. Paul Whelan, also convicted of espionage and also labeled wrongfully detained. Active duty Staff Sergeant Gordon Black, convicted of theft and threatening his Russian girlfriend. There are also dual nationals, Alsu Kurmasheva, a reporter for Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, accused of violating a foreign agent law, and Ksenia Karelina, accused of treason for donating $51 to Ukraine. Today, the U.S. State Department said they're working privately to bring Gershkovich and others home.
We will continue our efforts. Those have been happening before Evan's trial. They will continue during the trial, and should he be convicted, which of course he will be, it's not a free trial, they will continue after the trial, but we want to see him returned home immediately.
So what does today's trial say about Russia and the possibilities of a prisoner swap? For that, we turn to Angela Stent, who worked in the State Department during the Clinton administration and served as a top U.S. intelligence officer on Russia during the George W. Bush administration. She's now with the Brookings Institution and author of Putin's World, Russia Against the West and With the Rest. Angela Stent, thanks very much. Welcome back.
To be here.
To the NewsHour. U.S. officials and the Wall Street Journal both today called the trial a sham and illegitimate. Is that how you see it?
Oh, yes. It's a travesty. It's not a trial. They already know what the verdict's going to be. They know what the sentence is going to be. And Evan Gershkovich is a fine, talented journalist. He was writing some excellent stuff on the wartime economy. He was accredited in Russia. And when he went to Yekaterinburg to go to this factory and see how they were replenishing their tanks, that's when they arrested him. So it really is a sham, as the government has said.
The White House also called him a bargaining chip. Are a trial and the expected conviction the requirements almost to begin the process of possibly having a prisoner swap that would release him?
They definitely are. And Putin has said as much. His spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, has said that. So we don't know how long the trial will take. The next hearing isn't until August the 13th. Since everything is completely secret, we won't know anything about the proceedings. And once it's over and once they announce that he's been sentenced, presumably to 20 years, then I think they will talk more seriously about exchanging him. I mean, this really is completely a political arrest, and it's a hostage negotiation.
The trial is opaque, as you point out, but also the hostage negotiations are opaque. But we do have one name that has emerged from Russian officials to American officials, and that is Vadim Krasikov, believed to be a Russian intelligence officer, convicted in Germany of murdering a Chechen who had fought Russian soldiers. We don't know for sure, but is there a either 1-for-1 deal or a 2-for-2 deal that would include Paul Whelan somewhere out there on the table?
So Putin, a few months ago, gave us a hint that that was on the cards. But this was when Alexei Navalny was alive, and then he died. And then Putin said there would have been an exchange for Navalny and Evan Gershkovich for this FSB assassin, Vadim Krasikov. Now that Navalny's dead, the question is, you know, what happens? The Germans really wanted Navalny. They would have to give up Krasikov because he's sitting in a jail in Berlin. But I do understand that there are negotiations going on, and hopefully Paul Whelan will be part of them now, too.
That word reciprocity that we heard Putin use earlier, that is what U.S. officials believe is either a 1-for-1 or 2-for-2. Is that how you see that
Yes,
word?
that's how I see that. Unfortunately, I think the other two people who were mentioned in your story, they're not part of that negotiation at the moment.
Dual nationals.
Dual nationals.
U.S. officials tell me that Russia treats the dual nationals differently.
Oh, yes, and it wants to punish them for, you know, going to the United States and getting American citizenship, too.
In terms of other possible Russian intelligence officials, or anyone at least accused of espionage, as Whelan and Gershkovich mostly are. A senior State Department official recently told us about a full spectrum of hybrid activities and subversion campaigns across Europe, and highlighted some arrests that have recently been publicized. Czech authorities charged a man with terrorism for allegedly trying to set buses on fire on behalf of Russia. The UK recently expelled a military attaché after an arson attack. German officials are talking about another possible arson attack by Russians. Are these the kinds of people that the U.S. and European allies would be looking to detain in order to possibly have a trade for people like Gershkovich?
Well, first of all, the U.S. and the Europeans don't detain people just to exchange them, right? I mean, these people carried out these acts. It's possible. It gets very complicated when other countries are involved. With Brittany Griner, we were just talking about someone, Victor Bout, who was in the U.S. It doesn't mean it couldn't happen, but that would make it much more complicated than how would you choose which one to exchange. As far as we know, there's no one in the U.S., Russian, in jail that's of high enough value that the Russians would be willing to trade Evan Gershkovich for him.
What did these activities in Europe say about what Putin and Russia are doing in Europe?
Putin thinks that he's at war with the West. He's determined to win this war with Ukraine. And they're really upping all of these sabotage activities. We know that there's election interference going on in Europe, in the United States as we speak. They had a deep fake video of the State Department spokesman the other day saying things. So they're really, I think Putin is more confident than he was before, and he is determined to do anything he can to wreak havoc in Europe or the United States.
We saw, obviously, the peak of Russian interference in the U.S. election in 2016. U.S. officials say the interference in 2020, 2022 was lower. What do you anticipate this year?
I think it will probably be lower than it was in 2016, but I think it's still going on. I mean, the use of social media and things like that is, as we speak, is going on, and then supporting different groups against each other. What the Russians want is chaos in the United States and Europe, and that's what they're promoting.
Very briefly, Angela Snett, while I have you, Putin has done something that we haven't seen him do in the past, and that is appoint a number of relatives to high jobs in the Russian government. Why?
So this is, I think, part of an elaborate succession plan. I'm not saying that Putin's going to step aside anytime soon, but his first cousin, once removed, she was just made deputy defense minister. The sons of various close colleagues of Putin have been promoted to high positions in the Kremlin, in the government. So they're setting the stage for the next generation to take over at some point, but people who share their views and want to continue the system. And it's also a way, I think, for Putin to ensure that nothing will happen to his family when he's not in the Kremlin anymore.
Something, of course, that he guaranteed to Yeltsin when he took power.
Of course he did, yeah.
Angela Sten, always a pleasure. Thanks very much.
Major news from the White House today. President Biden announced pardons for former U.S. service personnel who were convicted under a military law repealed in 2013 that banned gay sex. The move today would potentially cover thousands of veterans who were forced out of the military because of their sexual orientation. Lindsay Church is executive director of Minority Veterans of America and joins us now from the White House, where they are attending an event. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Help us understand the details of this pardon, how it works and how it would affect veterans who were previously criminalized under the law.
So today the announcement was made that President Biden would use his clemency authority to pardon service members who received a discharge under what's called Article 125, which criminalizes gay sex, as you mentioned. So folks that were kicked out and sent to court-martial based off of sodomy laws are now have the opportunity to apply to have that have the pardon in that court-martial and to eventually have their discharges upgraded. As you mentioned, this is expected that it could be up to a few thousand service members that were impacted by this. The process would not be automatic. The service member would still have to apply for the program under the pardon, and they would then go through the discharge upgrade process, but they would be entitled to, as long as they meet the certain requirements, to be able to have their discharges upgraded to honorable, which would allow them to be entitled to benefits that they have otherwise been denied for the last however long. Sodomy laws were in place between 1951 and 2013, so many of these service members are long past, and their families will be able to apply for the benefits as well posthumously. So they would have anything up to and including burial rights in National Cemetery.
What about service members who were also discharged and criminalized in different ways, not under Article 125? How does this apply to them, if at all?
It won't. There's a very specific group of folks that are pardoned that it's going to be specifically discharged under Article 125. There are different programs that allow for people to apply for discharge upgrades should they have gone through or been discharged under what's called the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy, or for homosexual acts. So there are processes in place in which that service member can apply for a discharge upgrade, and they can do that through the review boards for the military services. So many of those service members are already eligible and have the ability to apply for the program. But like I said, one of the biggest problems with both of these programs is that they're not automatic. And so it requires that the service member, former service member, and their family actually apply for the clemency. So they would actually, it's not automatic, and they wouldn't just automatically get it. They would actually have to go through the process. The VA issued a website today for anybody who is possibly entitled to the benefits of the clemency about Article 125, along with an FAQ section that says the criteria for which you would have to meet and the criteria in which you wouldn't apply or you wouldn't be able to meet the requirements for the program.
Do you have a sense of why the Biden administration is making this move right now?
I think we're at a point where we are correcting past wrongs. This, like you mentioned, this sodomy laws were repealed in 2013. It's now 2024. It's been a decade long past that we have been waiting for people to be able to access these benefits. And right now, obviously, it's Pride Month. It's an opportunity for us to celebrate the accomplishment and to recognize that our country did a disservice to a generation of service members that were truly, truly criminalized for nothing more than their sexual orientation or gender identity. And there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the people that were discharged under these policies, and it's going to take small solutions like this for 2,000 service members at a time to reach the generation of service members like myself and those that served before 2011 when Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed.
You served in the military for 4 years, as I understand it, most of those years under Don't Ask, Don't Tell. What was that like for you?
I served all but 3 months under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and it was a really hard time. You live under intense fear that you could wake up today and somebody would find out your secret, and you would go from being a linguist in the military to being dishonorably discharged and sent home with the equivalent of a felony on your record. I, spent a lot of time in the hospital because I got hurt in the military. Spent 65 days in the hospital. I couldn't have my partner with me. I couldn't, connect with the people that I needed to most because the military, if they found out that I had a girlfriend or a partner back home, could potentially kick me out, and I would lose access to everything, including the health care that I desperately needed because of the injuries that I incurred in service. So it was a very hard time in which you spend all this time waiting and hoping that you aren't going to be next and picked out of a lineup for nothing more than just who you are. Many of us served our country. I'm transgender and very proudly served my country. 1 in 5 transgender Americans before the ban was lifted would serve in the military, which means that we're more patriotic as LGBTQ people. We serve at twice the rate, and we've lived under these criminal laws for a long time. And so little by little, we are working towards righting these wrongs, but it's been a long process to get to a place of healing around that policy.
Lindsay Church is Executive Director of Minority Veterans of America. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you so much for having me.
Immigration has become a flashpoint this election cycle, and it's expected to be a key issue in Thursday's presidential debate. White House correspondent Laura Barone-Lopez has more. Laura?
Thanks, Amna. On the trail, former President Donald Trump has repeatedly made baseless claims blaming undocumented migrants for a violent crime wave. But nationwide, violent crime is down 15%, and undocumented immigrants are 26% less likely than native-born Americans to be arrested and convicted of murder, according to a new report in Texas from the libertarian Cato Institute. On the southern border today, Homeland Security Secretary Alejandro Mayorkas said President Biden's policies are working. Weekly average Border Patrol encounters have decreased more than 40%, the lowest level of encounters since January 2021. For an on-the-ground perspective of the situation at the U.S.-Mexico border, first we're joined by Sheriff Mark Dannels of Cochise County, Arizona. Sheriff Dannels, thank you for joining the News Hour. I wanted to ask you, the Biden administration today says border encounters are down, including in your area of the border. Are you seeing that decrease?
Well, I went back and looked, and I asked my border team to give me some stats, and we are down. And we saw this trend coming here about a month ago to look at the stats. So they are down. But I think if you look at the overall picture, what's going on, 2 years ago, this was a crisis, even with the numbers we're seeing today. And which means it's still a crisis. I love to see the success, but we're not where we need to be.
Your county is along the southeastern border of Arizona with Mexico. Help us understand what the day-to-day is like for you and your team.
But we deal with the gotaways, which these are people that are not giving up. These are the people that are smuggled under the control of the criminal cartels. They jump in vehicles. They go 100 miles an hour through my communities. Again, over 28 months, we booked just under 3,400 people for border-related crimes in my county. The smug is still going on. It's not like it's gone away. And it's nice to celebrate what's going on, like Secretary Mayorkas is doing. But let's not forget, for 3.5 years, we have seen tragedy after tragedy up to death, not just in Cochise County, but throughout our southwest border and beyond, now within our community. So we need to be real to it, too, and not celebrate too early. There's nothing to be celebrated about yet. Let's get a handle on this.
You said you're dealing with a lot of border-related crimes. What kind of crimes?
Everything from drugs, stolen vehicles, people with warrants, and these are the ones coming here. I think it's important to note, out of the almost 3,400 people that were arrested and booked into our 3 jails here in my county, only 190 were foreign-born or legally in the country. These are people that are coming from all over the United States. A lot of them have criminal histories. They come down here in stolen cars. They bring their fentanyl with them. They bring their crimes with them. And that's what we're addressing as they come into my county to disturb our quality of life here. And then you look at their pursuits. They pick up, they go 100-some miles an hour through our communities, which ends up a lot of times crashes. People are injured, people are killed. Again, sad situation, and that has not stopped.
You say that the border encounters are down in your area of the border. President Biden recently put a crackdown in place, temporarily blocking asylum seekers between ports of entry. What else do you want to see him do?
Well, we still need to follow the rule of law. Again, what I was briefed on a couple of days ago was the numbers. This was they used like 4,000, like 4,200 people had crossed the day before when I was in Oklahoma City. Out of those 4,200 people, let's just be real with the math. He stated 1,900, almost 2,000 were released into the country. Not deported, not told to go back. We still need to look at coming across the border illegally is a crime. It needs to be addressed. It needs to be, persons need to be expelled as federal law states. We're not doing that. We are now accepting what I call celebratory new norm, which is it's okay to come across the border legally. A percentage gets to stay, and the rest will address accordingly.
So what else do you think, though, that the federal government should do? Would you support that bipartisan border deal that Republicans voted against?
I think we need to support bipartisan laws, measures, and reform. I truly do. I'm all about that because they were elected no different than I was, and that is to protect our communities, protect our citizens, and protect our country. And when you put your political party above the people, you're going to fail every time. And that's what I think Congress is doing. Even parts of the White House is doing this. For 3.5 years, we've been dealing with the tragedy on the border. And let's do this collectively with our federal government. Let's do it right.
Sheriff Mark Dannels of Cochise County, Arizona, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Now for another perspective from the Texas-Mexico border, we're joined by immigration attorney Jennifer Babai, who works with asylum seekers in El Paso. Jennifer, thank you so much for joining. President Biden recently put new restrictions on asylum seekers. And we just spoke to Sheriff Mark Dannels in Cochise County, who said that he's seen some decrease in border encounters, but still called it a crisis. What are you seeing at the El Paso border?
We are seeing so much fear, confusion, and just overall frustration from the families and the individuals I've spoken to since the suspension came down. People are at a loss of what to do. They're trying their best to understand the new rules and to comply with them. But I've got to say, we haven't seen new appointments issued by the administration since CBP-1 was rolled out late last year. And we are also cutting off all access to asylum. So families are at their wits' end of where they're supposed to go from here.
CBP-1 meaning the Customs and Border Protection app that asylum seekers can use. What are you hearing from migrants that you're speaking to? Are they aware of the crackdown at the border? And are more families deciding to send their kids over alone since unaccompanied minors are still allowed in?
We're going to be seeing lots of troubling patterns increasing in the next few months. Already in these last 3 weeks, we have seen single mothers with children turned away for something as small as CBP didn't believe they had a translator available to interview the person. And most people are not aware or understand the change in the rules because they are so complex. The executive order does nothing to actually stop or prevent someone from coming up to seek asylum, but what it does do is brutally then close the door in their face and say, go back to Mexico, go back home, or stay in detention and we'll give you a removal order before you do leave. So it's a brutal mechanism, and trying to explain this to families who are at the end of their journey and hoping to find safety in the U.S. Is a complex matter.
That executive order that President Biden issued about 3 weeks ago now, the administration said was about taking pressure off of an overwhelmed immigration system. And it makes it so asylum seekers can't declare asylum between ports of entry. Are you seeing any progress in that area when it comes to helping an overwhelmed immigration system?
Absolutely not. The facts on the ground are that although the executive order reads innocuous, and the stated goals are efficiency, what's happening is that we are simply telling more and more people they're ineligible for asylum, but the government, meaning Border Patrol, law enforcement, still has to process them at the border. So nothing in this suspension is targeting the reason for the backlog, which is people need access to information, they need access to attorneys, they need court dates. And this order does nothing to fix any of those issues.
What's next for the migrants that you're working with? What options do they have left?
It is a dismal time as an advocate to speak with individuals about their options because there are close to none. For individuals that I've interviewed in Mexico, many have traveled days, weeks to come to that area. And they're also facing discrimination by law enforcement officials in Mexico. So not only are they meeting a closed door when they are attempting to seek safety here, but they are getting pushback and altercations with law enforcement in Mexico. We're even seeing that unaccompanied children are being prevented from coming to the port of entry and trying to seek safety. And it's leading to family separation, meaning it's leading to families making impossible choices about how will they try to leave a shelter, walk up to the border, and try to seek safety with or without other members of their family because of their fear of what will happen if they remain in Mexico another day.
Jennifer Babai in El Paso, Texas, thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
The long fight against HIV/AIDS may get a powerful new weapon. A new drug taken by injection only twice a year shows great promise in preventing new HIV infections. It could have far-reaching impacts, especially in lower-income countries that are facing rising infection rates. William Brangham has the details.
That's right. This drug is called lenacapavir, and it is made by the drug maker Gilead, which recently said that in a clinical trial of 2,000 patients in South Africa and Uganda, not one person taking the drug was infected with HIV. So if this drug pans out as hoped, what would that mean for global HIV care? To understand that, we turn to one of the world's leading experts in HIV treatment and prevention. Salim Abdul Karim is the head of CAPRISA, one of South Africa's top HIV/AIDS research centers, and which helped run this study. Salim Abdul Karim, so nice to have you back on the program. As I mentioned, this drug is not yet approved for use in the marketplace, but let's say these results hold up. What would this mean? How potent a tool would this be in the fight against HIV?
Great to be here with you, William. Well, in my 40 years of doing AIDS research, I have never seen a result like this. Absolutely amazing to see a drug like this that provides 100% protection. So when you look at a drug like this, and given that it's in a completely new class of antiretrovirals, we do not have circulating resistance to this drug. And so we are seeing high levels of protection because it's not a drug that the virus has already been exposed to. But its potential as a highly efficacious prevention mechanism is enormous. Given that our goal is to try and end the AIDS pandemic by 2030, and this is ending it as a public health threat, we need to focus on the three key groups where HIV continues to be a major challenge. And those three groups are men who have sex with men, in particular younger men who have sex with men, injecting drug users, and in Africa, young women. Indeed, young women bear the brunt of the HIV pandemic in Africa, and the study was undertaken in exactly that group. And if we can get this drug rolled out to large numbers of high-risk women, we could make a huge dent on the pandemic.
But given that there is already a prevention pill, Truvada or PrEP as it is known, that people take every single day, why does this twice-a-year shot make such a difference?
So studies done with antiretrovirals taken as a daily tablet or daily pill have shown that we have a challenge in individuals maintaining the ongoing use of these drugs, what we refer to as adherence or compliance. The big challenge you have is that the individuals taking the drug are well and healthy people. They don't have HIV. So it requires an extra amount of effort for them to be able to remember that every day that they are at risk of HIV and they need to remember to take their tablets. It also places an onus on the individuals to go to the hospital to collect the medications at a regular interval. And that becomes a high bar when we're dealing with people who are essentially well. The difference now is that basically individuals who are at risk need to think about their risk of HIV twice a year, and they need to make the effort to go to a clinic or a hospital to get this injection just once every 6 months. That sets a much lower bar, and therefore we think we'll have better adherence and will lead to a larger number of patients taking it up and maintaining their long-term use of this injectable.
In the US and certain parts of the West, new HIV infections, certainly deaths from AIDS, have really dropped off people's radar. I know that's not the case elsewhere in the country, certainly not where you are in South Africa. Can you remind us the challenges you still face fighting this pandemic?
Well, the problem was that COVID-19 literally, came in with such gusto that it consumed all of the world's attention. I think we're seeing that there's a lot of what I call fatigue, AIDS fatigue. People are just tired of this problem. They moved on mentally, physically. And so the other pandemics that were occurring, they haven't gone away. They remained with us. And the three big pandemics are malaria, tuberculosis, and HIV. And of those, in terms of HIV, in places in many countries in Africa, AIDS remains one of the biggest challenges. In South Africa, it remains one of the top 10 causes of death. If you take it at a global level, just last year, there were in the region of around 1.5 million new infections. That's a lot of new infections still continuing at a global level. But it's not just that we're seeing new infections occurring, we continue to have a high number of deaths. Around 700,000 deaths occurred last year. So we've got to change that narrative. We've got to slow down the spread of this virus, and we've got to protect people from dying.
All right, Salim Abdul Karim, the head of CAPRISA in South Africa. It is always good to see you. Thank you so much for being here.
It's a pleasure.
More than a quarter of Americans now claim no religious affiliation. That's according to the Pew Research Center. That group now comprises the largest bloc of Americans and follows decades of declining attendance among white Christians as well as Black Protestants and Jews. Judy Woodruff reports that for white Christians, there's also been a growing political divide within some faith communities. It's her latest installment of America at a Crossroads.
Across America, each week, a familiar sound. Christians of different denominations gathering to sing, worship, and find community. Yet, in a growing number of places in the country, especially away from major cities, that sound has been growing softer. And in some, like this American Baptist Church in southern Illinois, which has existed in some form since 1868, it will soon grow quiet altogether.
I've done a handful of baptisms while I've been pastor here, but I've done over 25 funerals. So we're just not offsetting the losses at this point. And once you get to a certain point, it's almost impossible to pull out of the nosedive.
We've had a bunch of birthdays because we haven't been really meeting the last couple of weeks.
For more than 17 years, Ryan Burge has been the pastor of First Baptist Church, ABC, in Mount Vernon, one of the many mainline Protestant denominations that once dominated the nation's cities, towns, and countryside. Yet, since 1972, even as the country's population has grown over 60%, the proportion of white Americans attending churches like these or even identifying as a Christian has fallen precipitously. This church will close for good in July.
Religion is just not a central part of life for lots and lots of people. Today in America, about 25% of people report weekly church attendance, which puts us on par with a country like Italy. We were above 40% at one point. Amongst Catholics, 50% were weekly Mass attenders in 1972. It's 20% today. So we're seeing a decline in religious attendance across almost every religious tradition, not just Protestants, but also Catholics as well.
And Jesus answered, "Very truly I tell you, no one..."
In addition to being a pastor, Burge is also a political scientist, teaching at Eastern Illinois University, where he studies the intersection of faith, politics, and the data behind it, describing these broad trends in his 2023 book, The Nones, about the growing share of Americans who identify as atheists, agnostics, or nothing in particular.
90% of Americans used to identify as Christians in 1972. It's about 65% today. And the share of Americans who are white Christians is now below half. The Nones have gone from, N-O-N-E-S, have gone from 5% of America in 1972 to almost 30% of America today. Amongst young people, it's over 40% of America. So we're facing an entirely different religious landscape today than we did even 30 years ago.
What is your best understanding of what's happened, of why fewer and fewer Americans feel some connection with a church or with a faith?
I think a lot of it is that Americans are anti-institutional now. And if you look at data and trust in institutions, we don't trust anything today as much as we trusted it 40 years ago, whether it be banks or unions or the media or religion. They're not seeing the value that religion plays in people's lives. And they're also thinking, and I think this is the thing that I push back against the most, that religion is only about belief. Religion's also a social enterprise. You come here, you sit next to people who are different than you learn how to volunteer, you learn how to run meetings, you learn how to fundraise, you learn about the Bible, but you also learn that other people are good people.
Good. How about some pulled pork?
Just a few miles away, some of those volunteers are helping the needy at this once-a-month food pantry, Angels on Assignment, where they provide free food, clothing, and help with expenses. The population of Jefferson County is shrinking as it ages, and its politics have swung further to the right. In 2000, voting 54% in favor of George W. Bush, to nearly 72% in favor of President Trump in 2020. Volunteers here join from across local denominations, but this outreach is organized by another mainline denomination in steep decline. The United Methodist Church has fallen from 11 million people in 1967 to half of that today, and in just the past 2 years lost about a quarter of its churches over issues surrounding same-sex marriage and LGBTQ clergy.
The Lord's table is the place where the distinctions between rich and poor, powerful and powerless are erased.
On a recent Sunday morning, though, First United Methodist pews were mostly full, with more joining online. And a full choir leading the congregation, including Keith and Cheryl Cox.
One more time.
A decade ago, Keith, a retired choir director, and Cheryl, a former German teacher and school administrator, moved from northern Illinois to the family farm here. The first church they joined closed, with too few members to sustain it. The next one, a Methodist church close to home, didn't align with their views on supporting border migrants through UMCOR, the church's relief agency, and the decision to close churches during the COVID-19 outbreak.
When I was on the church council and I heard the church leaders in that council being very unhappy about the fact that UMCOR was helping migrants and that the bishop was a terrible person for trying to keep people safe, that truly troubled me. And so I was not as interested in being a part of that church at that point in time.
Now, Keith and Cheryl drive 45 minutes each way, twice a week, to sing in the choir and worship at First United Methodist in Mount Vernon.
It's the best 45-minute drive that I have on a regular basis, because I do feel uplifted when I go to the church. And I can't say that that's been true even at the other Methodist churches that I've been to.
And recognizing that politics was now a part of the church set of beliefs, how did that make you feel?
I think politics has invaded schools and healthcare and just about every aspect of our lives. So I shouldn't be surprised that it is invading in some ways in the church. But did it make me feel uncomfortable? Absolutely.
Singing alongside Keith and Cheryl Cox is Seth Calvert, who was drawn to this church first by its music, then by its message.
The Lord's table is the place where gay and straight and every other orientation in between can discover and receive the gift of God's life-giving grace.
It honestly, kind of rocks my world that there are people who are Christians who are actually open-minded.
That's the reasoning is they're going to...
Calvert lives in Mount Vernon with his husband, Brandon. He was raised Southern Baptist, but felt increasingly uncomfortable with that branch as he aged, especially as he heard things from the pastor that conflicted with his realization that he was transgender.
One of the examples that actually was the reason I ended up leaving that church was he was going on a tangent about, how trans rights was all bad and all that. And he said the civil rights movement was a mistake because now we have the gay rights movement. And it was like, that's wrong.
You were hearing that, and then what were you thinking?
Like I had been taught, if you see things going wrong, you always stay there and try and fix them. And that's what I was trying to do for years and years in that church. And then it got to the point that it's like, there's no way I can fix this. There's no way that me sticking around is going to be able to help these people see that what they're saying and doing is wrong.
It's almost like we've become a safe haven for refugees from other traditions and even other United Methodist churches who have felt excluded.
Victor Long leads this congregation of the United Methodist Church, whose motto is open minds, open hearts, open doors.
The churches they often come from are very rigid and narrow, and I know some have come from churches where politics was really the theme of the messages they heard, and they're looking for a safe place where they're not told what to believe, where they have freedom to ask questions and room to grow in their faith.
On the day we visited, Long delivered a sermon on the importance of unity.
The Lord's table is the place where Democrats can kneel alongside Republicans. Where else in the world are you going to see that?
I just felt like it was the right time for people to be reminded of that. And communion is the perfect setting for it, because that's when we come together as one and receive the bread and wine.
And when you say it's the right time, what's made it the right time, do you think?
Because all the other voices that get airtime in the church are about division and who's right and who's wrong, and we need to leave. And people need to hear that I believe Christ calls the church to unity. In spite of our differences. It's not uniformity, but it's unity in the body of Christ.
Long says his congregation includes Republicans, Democrats, and everything in between, a hallmark of mainline Protestant churches. But that is becoming increasingly rare, according to Ryan Burge.
For a long time, we always thought that religion was the first lens and politics was downstream of that. So, what party I voted for, I looked at the Bible, I think about my theology, how I view the world, and then I picked Republican or Democrat. Now things have changed. The recent data says that we pick our religion based off our politics. So if I'm a Republican, I'm going to seek out a congregation that affirms my views and really tells me what I want to hear. So that's why a lot of people have left religion over the last 50 years. So even today, amongst liberals, 50% of them are non-religious. Amongst conservatives, it's only 12%. So what we're seeing more and more is people go, well, I can't do that.
In our next story, we'll visit an evangelical church in Tennessee that has leaned heavily into politics and President Trump, but is now having second thoughts. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Judy Woodruff in Mount Vernon, Illinois.
And join us again here tomorrow night for a preview of Thursday's CNN presidential debate. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. I'm Jeff Bennett.
And I'm Amna Nawaz. On behalf of the entire NewsHour team, thank you for joining us.
Major funding for the PBS NewsHour has been provided by the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions, and friends of the NewsHour, including Jim and Nancy Bildner, and the Robert and Virginia Schiller Foundation.
Cunard is a proud supporter of public television. On a voyage with Cunard, the world awaits. A world of flavor, diverse destinations, and immersive experiences. A world of leisure and British style. All with Cunard's White Star service.
The Ford Foundation, working with visionaries on the front lines of social change worldwide. Funding for America at a Crossroads was provided by and with the ongoing support of these individuals and institutions. This program was made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting and by contributions to your PBS station from viewers like you. Thank you.
You're watching PBS.